14284, page 3 by line 2, should read, Miniprod forecast increased choco ration April 1984 from 20 to 25 grams per week.
Possibly the most famous of all the dystopian works is George Orwell's 1984. The novel was published in 1949, and ever since the term Orwellian has become common parlance for a dystopian system. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. It's not just the author's name that has become synonymous with dystopia in general. Many of Orwell's literary inventions have become part of the English lexicon, from thought crime to newspeak to the ominous Big Brother, who we're reminded is always watching us. The book was brought to the big screen in 1956 with Michael Redgrave, but a film version released in the year 1984 was absolutely inevitable and saw John Hurt star as Winston Smith.
Right over from the hips, brothers and sisters, please. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Smith? 6079 Smith W? Yes, you. Bend lower. You're not trying. Watch me. There, brother. That's what I want.
One of the first novels to deal with the threat of mass surveillance long before the release of 1984 was We by Evgeny Zamyatin. Written in the early 1920s in Russian, it would first be published in English in 1924. Zamyatin faced real-life totalitarianism with the emergence of the Soviet Union, and he fled to the West, where his novel, featuring a world where names have been replaced by numbers and individuals literally live in a city made of glass so they have no privacy at all, proved very influential. The 1920s and 1930s would see a proliferation in dystopian literature. Franz Kafka wrote The Trial just before his death in 1924. The story sees our protagonist, Joseph K., brought to trial for a crime that is never explained to him by an impenetrably bureaucratic state. They're talking about things of which they don't have the slightest understanding anyway. It's only because of their stupidity that they're able to be so sure of themselves. Sinclair Lewis was inspired by real events to write It Can't Happen Here in 1935, where an Adolf Hitler-like figure takes power in the United States of America. And in 1932, Aldous Huxley released his most famous work, Brave New World. Many real-life figures would feature, including Henry Ford and Sigmund Freud. Even another great dystopian writer, H.G. Wells, makes an appearance in the story. Huxley would revisit Brave New World almost 30 years later, where he made the rare step of analysing his own predictions about how society would develop.
Well, I think I always had a feeling that I wanted to learn, and maybe that this was the most effective way of learning was to, I think it is very often the fact of getting things down is the best way of clarifying one's own mind. Maybe I am a little bit pedantic, but this has always been my desire to learn, to explore. And there I projected these things 500 or 600 years into the future, and it is rather alarming to find that only 27 years later, quite a number of these forecasts have already come true, and come true with a vengeance. I've written a few chapters on the things which have already come true, and in general on the menaces to individual liberty which seem to me to be in existence in the world today. I think there are very grave threats which, although they may not be acute, particularly in the democratic countries, are potentially very grave indeed. There are very great difficulties in putting certain problems into the form of art. Take the fact, for example, that poetry has very seldom had anything very significant to say about money, which after all preoccupies most of us a great deal, but there's extremely little in the in great poetry about this problem. And I mean, for example, in our own day, it seems exceedingly difficult to render in artistic terms one of the great problems of our age, which is the problem of population pressures pressing upon resources.
The threat of resource scarcity would soon become a key element of dystopian literature not long after Huxley addressed it. But in the 1950s, much of the dystopian genre dealt with the biggest threat that emerged at the time, the nuclear age, where so much of civilization could be burned to ash in an instant. One author who managed to tap into the fears of the era so successfully was Ray Bradbury with Fahrenheit 451. Bradbury had been an avid reader as a child and was distressed to learn of the burning of the Library of Alexandria in ancient times, and as a teenager he'd been horrified by the footage of Nazi book burnings. After World War II, he was deeply concerned by the oppression of Joseph Stalin's regime in the Soviet Union, as well as the sense of paranoia created by the House of Un-American Activities Committee and the McCarthy trials in his home country. These concerns were all channeled into his dystopian work, in which firemen's jobs have been perversely twisted so that they now burn books themselves rather than fight fires.
I had no title for the book. The original title was The Fireman, and I got curious as to what the temperature was that book paper would burn out. And I called UCLA, the chemistry department. They couldn't help me. I called SC, some of the other physics departments, and they couldn't help me. I said, dummy, call the fire department. So I called downtown, got the fire chief on the phone. I said, this sounds stupid, but tell me, what temperature does book paper catch fire at? He said, just a moment. And he came back. He said it catches fire at 451 degrees Fahrenheit. And I reversed it. I said, Fahrenheit 451. Yes. So I don't know if that's true. I've never researched it since, but it has a wonderful sound to it, doesn't it? And that's how it came to birth. And I wrote the short novel in the basement of the UCLA library because I had no office. There was a typewriter there you could rent for 10 cents a half hour. So I took a bag of dimes down there and I rented the typewriter for 9 days and spent $9.80 and wrote a dime novel. And it was published in the science fiction magazine, and later I extended it to 50,000 words, and it became the novel that you know now.
In 1966, director Francois Truffaut would make his only English-language film when he adapted Fahrenheit 451 for the big screen.
Ah, now this one must be very profound. The Ethics of Aristotle. Now, anybody that read that must believe it's a catapult for anybody that hadn't. See, it's no good, Montag. We've all got to be alike. The only way to be happy is for everyone to be made equal. So, we must burn the books, Montag. All the books.
Sir?
Yes, what's the matter?
Trouble with the old lady downstairs. She won't leave. She won't leave a book, she says.
She won't leave a book, won't she?
When it comes to cinematic renderings of works of dystopian fiction, few have had the impact of Stanley Kubrick's 1971 adaptation of A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess.
Get me out. I might be sick. Get something for me to be sick in.
Very soon now, the drug will cause the subject to experience a death-like paralysis, together with deep feelings of terror and helplessness. One of our early test subjects described it as being like death, a sense of stifling or drowning. And it is during this period we've found the subject will make his most rewarding associations between his catastrophic experience of environment and the violence he sees.
Anthony Burgess wrote the novel in only 3 weeks, but in that time he created his own fictional language for his dystopian future called Nadsat. He chose to invent his own rather than use teenage slang of the time because it wouldn't be instantly dated. Andy Warhol would actually direct the first film adaptation of the novel in 1965, where it was given the title Vinyl. 6 years later, Stanley Kubrick would then take it on, and audiences were able to witness the terrifying Ludwika technique of behavior modification.
If I was to be a free young Malchik again in a fortnight's time, I would put up with much in the meantime on my brothers.
Cool.